The pilot stopped halfway down the aisle, his hand gripping the seat back as if the plane itself had offended him. His eyes locked onto the woman sitting alone by the window, and in that instant, the temperature inside the cabin seemed to drop. "Mom," he said sharply, loud enough for every passenger to hear. "You need to move. That seat isn't for you." The words landed like a slap. Conversations died. Breath caught. Somewhere behind them, a coffee cup rattled against its saucer as the aircraft shuddered lightly in the wind. The woman did not flinch. She was in her late 60s, maybe early 70s, with close-cropped grey hair and a face lined not by age alone, but by decisions, hard ones, carried for decades. She wore a dark wool coat, practical shoes, nothing that announced wealth or importance. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. She looked up at the pilot, meeting his stare with steady eyes, the kind that had watched storms roll in, and never looked away. "This is my assigned seat," she said, her voice low, controlled. No apology, no challenge, just a statement of fact. The pilot exhaled through his nose, irritated. Captain Daniel Brooks had flown for more than 30 years, former Air Force, former test pilot. Now the senior captain on a long-range charter flight, lifting off from a private terminal outside Chicago, bound for the West Coast. He believed in order, in hierarchy, in knowing who belonged where. And the woman in front of him did not fit the picture that lived in his head. Not the clothes, not the posture, not the silence. "There's been a mistake," he replied. "The forward cabin is reserved. I need you to relocate so we can depart." Around them, the cabin listened. Leather seats, polished wood, soft lighting that made everyone look a little richer than they were. A man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, pretending to scroll through his phone while watching everything in the reflection of the window. A flight attendant froze near the galley, fingers tightening around a linen napkin. She had seen this look on the captain before. Decisive, unyielding, dangerous in the wrong moment. The woman glanced down at her boarding card, then back up. "I boarded with the ground crew. They confirmed my seat." Her tone remained even, but something moved behind her eyes. Not fear, calculation. The pilot waved a hand, dismissive. "Ground makes mistakes," he said. "I don't. Please stand up." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice, but not enough. "We're on a schedule." A ripple of discomfort passed through the cabin. The flight attendant stepped forward. "Captain, I can check the manifest again," she offered carefully. Brooks didn't look at her. "It's already checked," he said. That was not true. He had skimmed it, trusting the assumptions he had carried for decades. He trusted his instincts more than screens, more than names, more than systems built by people he never met. The woman rose slowly, not because she was intimidated, but because she chose to stand. Her knees protested, stiff with age, but she masked it well. When she straightened, she was taller than expected, solid, grounded. She looked past the captain for a brief second, scanning the cabin, the faces, the small, telling reactions. She saw the man pretending not to stare, the attendant swallowing her words, the quiet approval in a few eyes, the discomfort in others. This was familiar terrain. "Where would you like me to sit?" she asked. The pilot pointed toward the rear cabin. "Anywhere back there," he said. "Those seats are more appropriate." The word hung in the air. Appropriate. The woman nodded once. She reached for her bag, a simple canvas carry-on, worn at the edges. As she stepped into the aisle, the captain turned away, already moving back toward the cockpit, satisfied. Problem solved. The flight attendant hurried alongside the woman. "I'm sorry about that," she whispered, not meeting her eyes. "Can I get you something once we're airborne?" The woman gave a faint smile. "Later," she said. "You might be busy." The attendant didn't understand the weight of that sentence, but she felt it all the same. As the woman took a seat near the back, the engines spooled louder. The door sealed with a heavy, final thud. The aircraft began to taxi. Captain Brooks settled into his chair, adjusting his headset, the moment already filed away as an inconvenience. Outside, rain streaked across the windshield, blurring the runway lights into long, trembling lines. "Let's go," he said to his co-pilot, voice calm again. "We're clear." But behind him, beyond the reinforced door, the cabin carried a different energy now. The woman by the window rested her head back and closed her eyes. She felt the vibration of the engines through the floor, through her bones. She had been on hundreds of flights, commercial and private, loud and quiet. She knew this feeling. The moment before things changed. Her fingers brushed the edge of her bag, where a slim folder pressed against the canvas. Inside were documents that did not care about instincts or appearances. Documents that carried weight, measured not in dollars alone, but in consequences. In the forward cabin, laughter bubbled from a small group of passengers who had witnessed the exchange and decided it wasn't their problem. One man shook his head, muttering something about delays. Another leaned back, relieved it hadn't involved him. The flight attendant returned to her duties, her movements precise, professional, but her eyes kept drifting toward the back, toward the woman who now stared out at the grey blur of the tarmac, waiting. The plane turned, lined up with the runway. The engines roared, a deep, physical sound that pressed everyone into their seats. The woman opened her eyes as the aircraft surged forward. Her reflection stared back at her in the window. Calm, unassuming, dangerous, in ways no one on board could yet imagine. As the wheels lifted from the ground, she exhaled slowly, already counting the minutes until the first call would come, until assumptions would collide with reality, until the sky itself would bear witness to who truly belonged where. The cockpit door closed with a soft hydraulic sigh, sealing Captain Daniel Brooks inside his world of switches, gauges, and unquestioned authority. He adjusted his headset, jaw tight, eyes forward. To him, the matter was finished, order restored. The aircraft climbed through low grey cloud, the city dissolving beneath them, and the cabin settled into that uneasy calm that comes right after a disturbance no one wants to name. In the rear section, the woman sat perfectly still. The vibration of the engines hummed through the seat frame into her spine. She welcomed it. Motion had always sharpened her thinking. She loosened her coat, folded it neatly on her lap, and took in the details around her the way other people read faces. The faint scuff on the aisle carpet where thousands of expensive shoes had passed. The smell of leather mixed with recycled air. The way the flight attendant kept glancing back, then forcing herself not to. Fear disguised as professionalism. 2 rows ahead, a man in his early 60s leaned toward his wife and whispered, not quietly enough. Probably booked wrong, happens all the time. His wife nodded, eyes fixed forward, grateful for the explanation. People liked simple stories. They clung to them. The seatbelt sign chimed off. The attendant moved again, cart rolling softly. When she reached the woman's row, she stopped. "Can I get you water or a coffee?" she asked, voice gentle, careful. The woman looked up, studied her face. Young, competent, tired in the way only people in service roles were tired. "Water is fine," she said, "and thank you for asking." The attendant poured with hands that trembled just slightly. When she handed over the glass, the woman's fingers brushed hers. Warm, steady. That steadiness lingered as the attendant walked away. Up front, Brooks was already deep into conversation with his co-pilot, Mark Jensen, a decade younger, eyes sharp, instincts less rigid. "Did you see the manifest update from Ops?" Mark asked, scrolling through his tablet. "They added a name late last night." Brooks waved him off. "Charter adjustments," he said. "Happens all the time." Mark hesitated. "Still, it's flagged." Brooks shot him a look. "We're airborne. If there's an issue, Ops will call. His tone ended the discussion. They didn't have to wait long. The call came through the secure line 20 minutes later, a chime distinct from all others. Brooks frowned. That channel was reserved for operations and ownership. Mechanical issues, regulatory checks, things that mattered. He answered. Brooks, the voice on the other end was calm, controlled, and unmistakably serious. Captain Brooks, this is corporate operations. We need confirmation on the status of Evelyn Grant. Brooks stiffened. Who? There was a pause, just long enough to register. Evelyn Grant, the voice repeated. Passenger on your flight. We need to confirm she is on board and accommodated according to contract. Brooks felt irritation flare. She's on board, he said. There was a seating adjustment. Silence again. He didn't like the silence. A seating adjustment? The voice asked carefully. Was that authorized? Brooks glanced at Mark, who had stopped breathing. I handled it, Brooks replied. What's the issue? The answer came slower this time. Captain, Ms. Grant is the principal stakeholder in this aircraft, the majority owner. The cockpit seemed to shrink. Brooks stared straight ahead, then down at the instruments, as if they might contradict what he had just heard. That's not possible, he said. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears. Ownership was transferred pending final review. Final review concluded 72 hours ago, the voice said. This flight is part of that transition. We were under the impression you had been briefed. Mark's tablet slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Brooks didn't notice. His mind raced backward, replaying the aisle, the coat, the calm voice, the word appropriate. He swallowed. Where is she now? Another pause. Where did you move her, Captain? In the cabin, the woman finished her water and set the glass down carefully. She reached into her bag and removed a thin folder, edges crisp, paper immaculate. She didn't open it yet. She didn't need to. She had memorized every line. Instead, she watched the reflection of the flight attendant pass in the window, saw the way her shoulders were tight now, braced for something unnamed. The woman closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of the engines, the unspoken tension rippling forward like a current. Brooks stood abruptly, his chair sliding back. You have the controls, he said to Mark, already unbuckling. Sir, Mark began, but Brooks was gone. The cockpit door opened, and he stepped into the aisle with a different posture than before. No authority now, just urgency. He moved quickly, scanning faces, the forward cabin first. Laughter had faded. Conversations died as he passed. He reached the rear section and stopped. The woman looked up as if she had been expecting him. He saw it then. Not triumph, not anger. Recognition. As if the room had finally caught up to her. Ms. Grant, he said. The name tasted strange. May I speak with you? She gestured to the empty seat beside her. He sat, rigid, knees angled away, hands clasped too tightly. There's been a misunderstanding, he began. She waited. He cleared his throat. Operations has informed me of your position. My position hasn't changed, she said quietly. Only your awareness of it. The words cut clean. Brooks nodded, shame creeping up his neck. I acted based on incomplete information, he said. I apologize. She studied him for a long moment. No, she replied. You acted based on assumptions. Information was available. You chose not to use it. He flinched. Around them, the cabin leaned in without leaning. The attendant hovered at the galley entrance, breath shallow. A man pretended to sleep. No one moved. Brooks straightened, the weight of decades pressing down on him. What would you like me to do? He asked. The woman considered the question. This was the moment people expected vengeance. Fire him, humiliate him, reverse the scene. She did none of those things. "I want you to finish the flight," she said. "Safely. By the book. And when we land, I want a full review of how decisions get made on your flight deck." She leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Because today, it wasn't about me. It was about who gets judged before they're known." Brooks nodded once. He stood, slower now, heavier. As he walked back toward the cockpit, the cabin exhaled in fragments. The woman settled back into her seat, eyes returning to the window. Outside, the clouds thinned, sunlight breaking through in sharp white lines. The plane pressed onward, carrying with it a reckoning that had only just begun. The cockpit felt different when Brooks returned. Smaller, quieter. Mark Jensen sat rigid in the right seat, hands steady on the controls, eyes forward but unfocused. He didn't ask what had been said. He didn't need to. He had seen the color drain from the captain's face. He had heard the change in his breathing. Brooks slid into his seat and strapped in with mechanical precision, as if muscle memory could hold together what judgment had fractured. "Autopilot engaged," Mark said after a moment, voice careful. Brooks nodded. He stared through the windshield at the thinning clouds, the sky brightening ahead, and for the first time in decades, he felt exposed in his own cockpit. Not by turbulence, not by weather, by a choice. In the cabin, the energy shifted again, subtle but unmistakable, wordless. The kind of change people felt before they understood it. The flight attendant returned to her station, posture straighter now, movements deliberate. She glanced toward the rear, caught the woman's eye, then looked away, heart pounding. Something had turned. She could feel it in the way the captain walked back without speaking to anyone, in the way his shoulders had lowered, as if gravity had increased. 2 rows ahead of the woman, the man who had whispered earlier leaned back and cleared his throat. He looked around, then forward again, suddenly interested in nothing at all. His wife folded her hands in her lap, lips pressed tight. They had sensed authority in the captain before. Now they sensed uncertainty, and it made them uneasy. The woman by the window did not move. Evelyn Grant rested her head lightly against the seat, eyes open, watching the pale blue sky sharpen as the plane climbed. She had not come looking for conflict. She had not dressed to provoke. The coat, the shoes, the quiet had been choices, yes, but not a test, not a trap. She had lived long enough to know that people revealed themselves without encouragement. All you had to do was give them space. She thought of the boardroom 3 nights ago, the signatures, the silence after the final document slid across the table. Men who had underestimated her then, too, though they never said it out loud. They never had to. She remembered the same look she had seen in Brooks's eyes when realization finally landed. The look of a world rearranging itself against someone's will. The seatbelt sign flickered on briefly as the plane adjusted altitude. A faint bump rippled through the cabin. The flight attendant steadied herself, then moved again, this time toward the forward section. She paused, glanced back once more, then continued. She had decided something. Evelyn saw it in the set of her shoulders. When the attendant reached the cockpit door, she knocked softly. Brooks looked up, surprised. She rarely interrupted unless necessary. He opened the door a fraction. "Yes?" he asked. She swallowed. "Sir," she said, voice respectful but firm. "Would you like me to offer Ms. Grant the forward seat back?" Mark looked up sharply. Brooks hesitated. The question hung between them, heavy. He pictured the aisle again, the eyes on him, the word appropriate. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Not yet." The attendant nodded, though disappointment flickered across her face. "Understood," she said, stepping back. As she turned away, Brooks added quietly, "Thank you for asking." The attendant returned to the cabin, her expression unreadable. She stopped beside Evelyn's row. "Miss Grant," she said softly, bending slightly. "If you need anything at all, please let me know." Evelyn looked up and smiled, just enough to ease the tension. "I will," she said. "You're doing fine." The engines droned on, steady and relentless. Time passed differently now. Every minute carried weight. Brooks went through his checklists with exaggerated care, reading every line, touching every switch, refusing to rely on habit. Mark noticed. He said nothing, but something like respect flickered in his eyes. This was how the captain flew when he was uncertain. This was how he flew when things mattered. An hour into the flight, another call came through operations. Brooks answered without hesitation this time. "Brooks," he said. The voice was the same as before, calm, measured. "We'll need a written account after landing," the voice said. "Standard procedure." Brooks nodded, though the other man couldn't see it. "You'll have it," he replied. "Every detail." There was a pause, then, "Thank you, Captain." The line went dead. In the cabin, Evelyn felt the plane bank gently, sunlight spilling across the aisle in warm bands. She adjusted her position, joints stiffening slightly, and let out a slow breath. This was the part people never saw. The waiting, the restraint. Power, real power, was rarely loud. It required patience. It required letting others finish the story they were telling about themselves. Across the aisle, a man finally leaned over. "Excuse me," he said, awkward, forced smile stretched too thin. "Can I ask, do you work with the company?" Evelyn turned to him, expression neutral. "I do," she said. The man nodded, relief flooding his face at the answer he thought he understood. "Ah," he said, "that explains it." He leaned back, satisfied. Evelyn looked out the window again. It explained nothing, and everything. As the hours passed, the cabin settled into a fragile peace. Drinks were served, meals were eaten. Conversation returned, cautious and subdued. Brooks flew the plane with flawless precision, but the confidence that once filled his movements was tempered now by awareness. Every decision felt heavier, every assumption questioned. It exhausted him in a way no long flight ever had. Near the rear window, Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the engines wash over her. She wasn't finished. Not with Brooks, not with this company. But she understood timing. She understood consequences unfolded best when they were earned, not rushed. When they landed, there would be meetings, reports, quiet changes that rippled outward, unseen but permanent. For now, the aircraft cut smoothly through the sky, carrying with it a truth that had already shifted the balance of power on board. The reckoning was no longer hypothetical. It was in motion, and everyone, whether they knew it or not, was flying straight toward it. The cabin lights dimmed a fraction as the flight crossed into a new airspace, the soft chime almost lost beneath the engines. For most passengers, it was nothing. For Captain Brooks, it sounded like a marker. Another line crossed, another chance to get this wrong. Mark Jensen broke the silence first. "Fuel burn is within margin," he said, steady, professional. Brooks acknowledged with a nod, eyes never leaving the instruments. He had flown this route more times than he could count, but today every mile felt inspected, not by regulators, by conscience. He thought of his father, a machinist who taught him that a checklist was a promise. Skip a step and you were lying to the machine, to the people inside it. In the cabin, the attendant, Rachel, moved with a different purpose now. She checked on passengers, but her attention kept circling back to Evelyn Grant like a compass needle. She had replayed the scene at the aisle again and again. The captain's tone. The word appropriate. Rachel had swallowed her instinct then. She would not do it again. She approached Evelyn's row, lowered her voice. "Miss Grant," she said, "we'll be serving lunch shortly. I can bring it here, or if you prefer more space." She let the sentence hang. Evelyn considered her, seeing the quiet resolve behind the politeness. "Here is fine," she said. "Thank you for asking." Rachel smiled, genuine this time, and moved on. 2 seats up, Linda Whitman noticed. She had noticed everything since the exchange. Linda was a woman accustomed to rooms bending toward her needs without a word spoken. She wore confidence like a tailored jacket. Today, it didn't fit. She leaned toward her husband and murmured, "Why is the crew hovering around her?" He shrugged, eyes fixed ahead. "Probably a complaint," he whispered. Linda's jaw tightened. Complaints were her territory. When Rachel returned with the tray, Linda cleared her throat loudly. "Excuse me," she said, voice honeyed and sharp all at once. "We're still waiting on our wine." Rachel turned, smile professional. "Of course, Ms. Whitman. I'll be right back." Linda watched Rachel walk away, then flicked her gaze to Evelyn. "Some people don't understand how these flights work," she said lightly, as if commenting on the weather. Evelyn met her eyes, said nothing. Silence did the work words didn't need to. The lunch service passed with subdued clinks of cutlery and the low murmur of restrained conversation. Brooks listened to it through the cockpit door, each sound a reminder of the world he was responsible for. He reviewed weather ahead, noted a developing system far off their route. Nothing dangerous, nothing urgent. Still, he adjusted course by a hair, choosing margin over efficiency. Mark noticed. "Conservative," he said. Brooks nodded. "It's a good day for it." Another call lit up the panel, this one less formal. Mark answered, then handed the headset over without a word. Brooks listened, expression hardening, then softening into something like resolve. He ended the call and sat back. "What was that?" Mark asked. Brooks exhaled. "Legal wants a timeline, and they want me to recommend next steps." Mark absorbed that. "What will you recommend?" Brooks didn't answer right away. He stared at the horizon, a thin blue line separating sky from sky. "Process," he said finally. "Training, accountability, mine included." Mark studied him. "That's new," he said. Brooks allowed himself a thin smile. "So is learning," he replied. In the cabin, Rachel returned with wine and an apology for the delay. Linda accepted it with a curt nod, her interest already elsewhere. She leaned toward the aisle, craning to see Evelyn more clearly. "You know," Linda said, louder now, "these seats cost a premium. There are expectations." Evelyn turned her head, slow and deliberate. "There are," she agreed. "Safety, respect, competence." Linda blinked, caught off guard. She laughed, brittle. "I meant comfort." Evelyn's eyes didn't leave hers. "Comfort fun as those," she said. Linda looked away first. Time pressed on. The sun arced. The cabin settled into the rhythm of long flight. Brooks ran his checks again, meticulous. He asked Mark for confirmation on items he usually handled alone. It wasn't insecurity. It was intention. Mark responded with clarity, relief creeping into his voice. This was leadership he could trust. Rachel paused near the cockpit door, considering. She knocked. Brooks opened it fully this time. "Captain," she said, "Ms. Grant asked for a word when you're able." Brooks nodded. "Now is fine." Mark adjusted in his seat, giving space. Brooks walked the aisle without haste. The cabin watched, openly now. He stopped beside Evelyn's row. "Ms. Grant," he said, keeping his voice level. "May I?" She gestured to the empty seat again. He sat, posture careful. "I've been thinking," he began, "about the decision I made. About why." She waited, patient. "I won't excuse it," he said, "but I want to understand it, so I don't repeat it." Evelyn regarded him, measuring sincerity. "You made a shortcut," she said. "You replaced verification with familiarity. It's human. It's also unacceptable at altitude." He nodded, agreed. She leaned back, eyes on the window. "This company has a reputation," she continued, "not because of leather or wood, because of people who follow the book even when it costs them time or pride." She looked back to him. Today, the book lost to habit. Brooks swallowed. "I intend to change that," he said, "starting with myself." A quiet spread through the cabin, the kind that comes when something important is being said. Linda shifted, uncomfortable. Rachel stood still, breath held. Mark watched from the cockpit doorway, hands clasped. Evelyn stood then, joints stiff but controlled. Brooks rose with her. She didn't take the forward seat. She didn't ask for it. Instead, she adjusted her coat and addressed him softly. "We'll talk more on the ground," she said, "with others present. Transparency matters." Brooks inclined his head. "Yes, ma'am." As he returned to the cockpit, the plane flew on, smooth and steady. The sky outside deepened to a rich blue. Inside, something had shifted again. Not resolved, not yet, but aligned. The next hours would carry them closer to land, closer to consequence. And for the first time since takeoff, Captain Daniel Brooks felt ready to meet it head on. The cabin grew quieter as the afternoon wore on. The kind of quiet that wasn't sleep, but restraint. People spoke less. They listened more. Even the hum of the engines seemed steadier, as if the aircraft itself had settled into a deliberate rhythm. Captain Brooks flew with both hands light on the controls, eyes moving constantly, no motion wasted. Mark Jensen noticed something else, too. The captain was no longer flying to arrive. He was flying to account for everything that might go wrong before it did. In the rear cabin, Evelyn Grant sat with her hands folded, the thin folder still tucked inside her bag. She hadn't touched it. Not yet. Power didn't need to announce itself early. It needed to be precise. She watched the aisle, the subtle choreography of people choosing when to look and when to look away. Linda Whitman had grown quieter, her earlier sharpness dulled into something brittle. She sipped her wine without tasting it, eyes flicking toward Evelyn, then quickly elsewhere, as if proximity itself carried risk. Rachel returned once more, not with service, but with presence. She paused near Evelyn's seat, pretending to check a latch. "Miss Grant?" she murmured, barely moving her lips. "I just wanted to say, thank you." Evelyn turned her head slightly. "For what?" Rachel swallowed. "For not making it worse," she said. Evelyn studied her, then nodded. "You didn't either," she replied. The words stayed with Rachel as she walked away, steadier than before. Up front, Mark finally broke. "You know," he said quietly, "most people would have doubled down." Brooks didn't look at him. "Most people don't get unlimited chances," he replied. Mark considered that. "Do you think she'll push for your removal?" Brooks exhaled slowly. "If she does," he said, "she'll be right." He paused, then added, "But I don't think that's what she's after." Another hour passed. Sunlight faded into a softer gold, stretching long shadows across the cabin walls. The aircraft entered smoother air, and the ride became almost serene. That serenity, however, was fragile. Everyone felt it. A glass surface over deep water. The intercom chimed softly. Brooks cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice even. "This is your captain. We're making excellent time. Conditions ahead are clear. If you need anything, our crew is here for you." It was a standard announcement, but the way he said it, slower, deliberate, carried something else. Responsibility. Ownership of more than just altitude and speed. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly at the sound of his voice. She wasn't listening to the words. She was listening to the tone. It mattered. Across the aisle, the man who had spoken to her earlier shifted again. He leaned closer this time, voice hesitant. "Ms. Grant," he said, "I hope I didn't offend you before." Evelyn opened her eyes, looked at him fully now. "You assumed," she said gently. "We all do." He nodded, relief and shame tangled together. "I won't again," he said. She believed he meant it. Whether it would last was another matter. In the cockpit, Mark reviewed arrival procedures. "Weather at destination is clear," he said. "Light crosswind." Brooks acknowledged. "We'll brief the approach twice," he said. Mark raised an eyebrow. Brooks met his glance. "For clarity," he added. Mark nodded. "Copy that." As the hours stretched, Brooks felt fatigue creep in. Not physical, but moral. The kind that came from seeing yourself clearly after years of not looking too closely. He remembered other moments, smaller ones. Times he'd trusted his gut over data. Times it had worked. Times it might not have. He wondered how many Evelyn Grants had passed through his aircraft unnoticed. Or noticed, but dismissed. In the cabin, Evelyn reached into her bag at last and removed the folder. She opened it slowly, the paper whispering in the quiet. She scanned the first page, eyes sharp, memory filling in the rest. Names, dates, procedures. She closed it again and slid it back. Not yet. The ground would be better for this. Linda Whitman stood abruptly, smoothing her jacket. She walked toward the galley, heels clicking too loud for the moment. Rachel looked up as Linda leaned in. "I need to speak with the captain," Linda said. Rachel hesitated. "I'll let him know," she replied. Linda's smile was tight. "Now," she said. Rachel met her gaze, something firm settling in her chest. "The captain is unavailable," she said evenly. "He'll be with you after landing." Linda's eyes flashed. "Do you know who I am?" Rachel did not flinch. "Yes," she said, "and I know what the procedures are." Linda stared, then turned away sharply, retreating to her seat. Evelyn watched the exchange without expression. Another small shift. Another line redrawn. Mark glanced back through the cockpit window, catching the movement. "Looks like word's spreading," he said. Brooks nodded. "It always does," he replied. "Truth has a way of moving faster than rumor once it starts." The plane began its gradual descent preparations. Seatbelt sign chimed on. The cabin responded, seats straightened, bags stowed, bodies bracing for transition. Evelyn adjusted her posture, joints complaining quietly. She breathed through it, familiar with discomfort, familiar with patience. Brooks made one last pass through his instruments, fingers steady. He felt the weight of the landing ahead, not because of weather or terrain, but because of what waited beyond the runway. Meetings. Questions. Decisions that would ripple outward. He had flown through storms that tore at the wings. This felt heavier. As the nose dipped slightly, sunlight broke across the cabin one final time, illuminating faces caught between relief and anticipation. Evelyn looked out the window, watching the horizon rise to meet them. She felt no triumph, no anger, only a firm, settled resolve. When the wheels finally touched down, the sound was smooth, controlled, professional. The plane slowed, turned, taxied toward the terminal. The journey through the sky was ending. The real one was about to begin. The aircraft rolled to a stop at the private terminal just as the sun dipped low enough to turn the windows amber. The engines wound down, a long exhale after hours of held breath. For most flights, this was the moment people reached for phones, loosened shoulders, prepared to leave the sky behind. This time, no one moved right away. The silence lingered, thick and expectant, as if the cabin itself understood that landing did not mean conclusion. Captain Brooks kept his hands on the controls a beat longer than necessary. Habit told him to run through shutdown by memory. He resisted it. He read every line. He spoke each confirmation out loud. Mark Jensen answered crisply, grateful for the clarity. When they were done, Brooks sat back and closed his eyes for half a second. Not relief. Readiness. The door opened. Cool air slid into the cabin, carrying the faint smell of rain and asphalt. Outside, a small group waited near the stairs. 2 people from operations, 1 from legal. No raised voices, no spectacle, just presence. The kind that meant things would be handled properly and thoroughly, whether anyone liked it or not. Rachel stood near the galley, watching Evelyn Grant rise from her seat. Age showed now in the careful way she straightened, in the slight pause before she stepped into the aisle. All right did not erase time. It lived alongside it. Evelyn adjusted her coat and met Rachel's eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. Rachel nodded, throat tight, unable to trust her voice. As Evelyn moved forward, the cabin parted without anyone asking. Linda Whitman remained seated, hands clenched around the armrests, gaze fixed straight ahead. She did not look at Evelyn. She did not look at anyone. The man across the aisle shifted, then stood, giving Evelyn space. "Safe travels," he said quietly, not knowing what else to say. Evelyn inclined her head. It was enough. Captain Brooks stepped out of the cockpit as Evelyn reached the front. For a brief moment, they stood facing each other in the narrow aisle. Not adversaries, not allies. 2 professionals, acknowledging the weight of what had happened between them. Brooks spoke first. "Ms. Grant," he said, voice steady. "I'll be available to answer any questions you have." Evelyn studied him, then nodded. "I expect you will," she replied. No threat, no promise, just inevitability. They exited together. On the tarmac, the sounds were sharper. Footsteps, distant engines, the quiet murmur of people who knew how to keep their voices low when consequences were in motion. A woman from legal approached Evelyn, handing her a tablet. "We've prepared an initial outline," she said. Evelyn glanced at it, then passed it back. "Later," she said. "Let everyone arrive first." She turned to Brooks. "You'll provide your account," she said. He nodded. "In writing," she added. "And in person." Again, he nodded. The exchange was clean, professional, final in its own way. Mark Jensen watched from the top of the stairs, heart pounding. He had never seen accountability handled like this. No shouting, no public humiliation, just gravity. He realized, with a start, that this was what leadership looked like when it wasn't afraid of itself. Linda finally disembarked, her heels clicking sharply against the metal steps. She scanned the scene, searching for something familiar to latch onto. Status. Deference. She found neither. When her eyes met Evelyn's, she looked away immediately, color rising in her cheeks. She hurried toward a waiting car without a word. Evelyn remained on the tarmac for a moment longer, watching the aircraft that now bore her name in a way few could see. She placed a hand briefly against the fuselage, feeling the residual warmth, the hum fading into stillness. Machines were honest. People took more work. She turned to the gathered staff. "We'll convene tomorrow morning," she said. "Full attendance. I want flight crew, operations, training, and human factors in the same room." The operations manager nodded, already making notes. "We'll have everything ready." Evelyn met his eyes. "I don't want theatre," she said. I want clarity. He nodded again, sharper this time. Captain Brooks stood slightly apart now, hands folded behind his back, posture military. He waited. Evelyn approached him last. "Captain," she said, lowering her voice, "you flew a safe landing." He met her gaze. "Thank you," he said. She held the silence a beat longer. "That matters," she added. He swallowed. "I understand." As Evelyn walked toward her car, Rachel watched from the doorway, emotions colliding in her chest. She had boarded this flight expecting another long day of polite invisibility. She was leaving it, having witnessed something rarer. Justice without cruelty. Correction without destruction. It made her stand a little straighter. The cars pulled away. The tarmac emptied. The aircraft sat quiet under the fading light, its journey complete, its reckoning only beginning. Brooks remained where he was, staring at the ground, replaying every moment from the aisle to the cockpit, to the call that changed everything. He felt stripped, but not defeated. Exposed, but not erased. He understood now that the most dangerous errors were not mechanical. They were human. And humans could change, if they chose to see themselves clearly. As the terminal doors closed and the sounds of the airport resumed their ordinary rhythm, one truth settled over everyone who had been part of the flight. The sky had not judged them. It had merely held them long enough for judgment to find its way home. Morning came with a clean, unforgiving light, the kind that stripped rooms of drama and left only facts behind. The conference room overlooked the runway, glass stretching from floor to ceiling, aircraft gliding past in silence. Coffee sat untouched along the table. No one joked, no one checked a phone. They were all waiting. Evelyn Grant arrived last, not for effect, but because she always did. She took the seat at the head without ceremony, set her folder down, and let the room settle. Captain Brooks stood at the far end, with Mark Jensen beside him. Rachel sat halfway down the table with other cabin crew, hands folded, spines straight. Operations, legal, training, human factors. All present, as requested. Evelyn opened the folder. Paper slid softly against paper. "This isn't a trial," she said. Her voice was even, unhurried. "It's a reconstruction." She looked at Brooks. "Captain, start from the moment you first saw me." Brooks inhaled. He didn't rush. "I saw a passenger seated in the forward cabin," he said. "Based on appearance and prior experience, I assumed there had been a seating error." He paused. The word assumed hung there. "I did not verify the manifest at that moment." Evelyn nodded once. "Why not?" He swallowed. "Because I trusted my judgment more than the process." No excuses, no padding. The room shifted. A pen stopped scratching. Someone exhaled. She turned to Mark. "Did you see the manifest update?" "Yes," Mark said. "I flagged it, but I deferred to the captain." His jaw tightened. "That was my choice." Evelyn made a note. "Thank you." She turned to Rachel. "What did you observe?" Rachel felt her pulse spike, then steady. "I saw a passenger being asked to move without verification," she said. "I wanted to intervene." "I didn't." Her voice caught, then held. "I chose hierarchy over procedure." Evelyn looked around the table. 3 decisions, she said, each understandable. Together, unacceptable. She closed the folder. This is not about intent, it's about exposure. Any one of those choices could have compromised safety if circumstances had been different. She stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind her back. A jet rolled by below, engines quiet. "Bias is not just a moral issue," she said without turning. "It's an operational risk. When assumptions replace verification, errors compound. She faced them again. Here's what will happen. The words were calm, final. Captain Brooks will be grounded pending retraining in human factors and decision-making under uncertainty. Mark Jensen will lead the review of cockpit communication protocols. Cabin crew will receive explicit authority to halt boarding or seating changes until manifests are verified. And this company will stop confusing comfort with competence. No gasps, no protests. Brooks nodded, accepting the weight. Mark straightened, already planning. Rachel felt something unclench in her chest. Evelyn gathered her folder. "This ends here," she said. "But the work starts now." She paused, eyes meeting each of theirs. "The sky doesn't care who you think belongs where. It only cares whether you're prepared." She left the room as quietly as she had entered. Outside, planes continued their steady ballet, indifferent and exacting. Inside, the room remained still for a moment longer. Then chairs shifted, pens moved, and the slow, serious work of change began. The review did not end in that room. It spread outward in measured waves, touching departments that had never spoken to one another before. Training schedules were rewritten, briefings grew longer, checklists expanded, not with more steps, but with sharper language. Words like verify replaced assume, confirm replaced feel. In hangars and offices, people began to notice the difference almost immediately. Captain Brooks spent his first week grounded in a simulator bay that smelled faintly of plastic and old coffee. No windows, no runway, just screens and silence. An instructor, half his age, sat beside him, not unkind, not deferential. "Run it again," she said when Brooks hesitated over a call-out. He did. Again. And again. Each time she stopped him at the same moment. "Why didn't you check?" she asked, every time. Brooks answered differently each time, until finally he stopped defending and started listening. Mark Jensen moved through his new role with a seriousness that surprised even him. He sat in on crew briefings, watched how junior pilots swallowed objections, how habits formed around personalities instead of protocols. He began asking questions no one had asked him when he was coming up. "What if the captain is wrong?" he would say calmly. The room would stiffen. Then, slowly, it would relax, because the question had finally been allowed. Rachel found her authority tested in quieter ways. A boarding delay here, a seating dispute there. Each time she stopped the process, requested verification, waited for confirmation. Some passengers bristled, some rolled their eyes, a few complained. Rachel held her ground. She remembered Evelyn's voice, calm, certain. She discovered something unexpected. When she spoke with clarity, people listened, not because she raised her voice, because she didn't need to. Evelyn Grant watched all of this from a distance. She did not insert herself into daily operations. She read reports. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was precise. She declined interviews. She cancelled a press release that legal had drafted without asking. "This isn't a story," she said. "It's a correction." The word mattered to her. Weeks later, Brooks returned to the flight deck for a supervised flight. His hands were steady, but his mind was different now. Louder, more cautious. Every assumption was questioned before it took shape. Mark sat beside him, not as a subordinate, but as a partner. When a discrepancy appeared between ground notes and the onboard system, Brooks didn't wave it off. He stopped. He checked. He delayed departure by 10 minutes. No one complained. No one even noticed. And that, he realized, was the point. After landing, Brooks didn't feel relief. He felt responsibility. The kind that didn't fade when the engines shut down. Evelyn met him once more, briefly, in a quiet corridor overlooking the ramp. No audience, no paperwork, "You fly differently now," she said. Brooks nodded. "I see differently," he replied. She held his gaze for a moment, then inclined her head. "That's all I needed to know." As she walked away, Brooks understood something he had missed for most of his career. Authority wasn't granted by rank or uniform. It was earned every time someone chose to do the harder thing instead of the easier one. The company moved forward, not dramatically, not loudly, but measurably. And in the air, where margins were thin and consequences absolute, that difference mattered more than anyone would ever announce. The change became visible in the small moments, the ones no press release could capture. A delayed pushback because a name didn't match. A captain who paused mid-brief to ask the quietest person in the room if they saw anything different. A cabin where authority moved laterally instead of downward. The company's numbers didn't spike. They stabilized. Incidents dropped. Complaints shifted in tone, from anger to inconvenience, and then to none at all. Captain Brooks felt the weight lift in increments. He slept better. He stopped replaying the aisle in his head and started replaying checklists, conversations, choices. He found himself mentoring differently, telling stories that ended with uncertainty instead of triumph. Younger pilots listened. Some bristled. Most leaned in. He didn't need to raise his voice anymore. He had learned what happened when certainty outran verification, and he had paid for that lesson in public silence. Rachel's confidence settled into something durable. She no longer asked permission to stop a process. She stated reasons and waited. The crew mirrored her tone. When a passenger complained, she acknowledged the feeling and held the line. She discovered that professionalism, when paired with clarity, disarmed entitlement. Not always, but often enough to matter. Linda Whitman tried once to reassert herself. An email to operations, a call to a board member she thought she still knew. The replies were polite and final. Policies had changed. Exceptions had narrowed. She adjusted, or she stopped flying with them. Either way, the system held. That, too, was new. Evelyn Grant visited the hangar one afternoon without announcing herself. She stood beneath the wing, listening to a mechanic explain a minor modification with careful pride. She asked questions. She took notes. She thanked him and moved on. Power, she believed, should be legible to the people doing the work. If it wasn't, it would eventually fail. On a clear morning, weeks later, Brooks watched the sun cut across the runway as he prepared for another departure. He caught his reflection in the glass, older than he remembered, steadier than he had been. Mark finished the brief and looked up. "Anything else?" Brooks thought, then shook his head. "Let's fly," he said. And for the first time in a long while, the words meant exactly what they should. The runway lights stretched ahead like a quiet promise as the aircraft lined up for departure. The early evening air smooth and forgiving. Captain Brooks rested his hands lightly on the controls. Not gripping, not hesitating, simply present. The cabin behind him had settled into its own rhythm, the low murmur of conversation blending with the steady hum of systems doing exactly what they were designed to do. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced. Just order, earned and maintained. He glanced once at the checklist, then once more at Mark Jensen beside him. Mark met his eyes and nodded, not out of habit, but out of shared certainty. The years between them no longer felt like rank and difference, but like continuity. When Brooks spoke, his voice was calm, measured, unhurried. "Clear for takeoff." The words carried weight because they were chosen, not assumed. As the aircraft accelerated, Brooks felt the familiar pull press him into the seat. He had flown through storms that rattled bone and nerve, through nights when the horizon disappeared entirely. This climb was smooth, almost gentle, but it felt heavier than most. It carried memory. It carried consequence. It carried the understanding that every decision made now would echo long after the wheels left the ground. In the cabin, Rachel moved down the aisle with practiced ease, her posture relaxed, her awareness sharp. She paused to help an older man adjust his seatbelt, listened patiently as a couple asked about arrival weather, answered with confidence that no longer needed to borrow authority from anyone else. When she passed the forward section, she glanced briefly at the empty seat that had once been the center of quiet tension. It was just a seat now. That mattered. Evelyn Grant was not on this flight. She rarely was anymore. Ownership did not require constant presence. Influence, when done right, traveled without her. She was instead in a quiet office overlooking a different runway, reviewing reports with the same steady attention she had given that flight weeks ago. Numbers told stories if you let them. Patterns emerged. Decisions followed. She closed one folder, opened another, and smiled faintly at a line item that showed a drop in reported incidents tied to human factors. Progress rarely announced itself. It showed up like this. Back in the air, Brooks leveled off and adjusted power. The sky deepened into a rich blue, the kind that reminded him why he had fallen in love with flying in the first place. He thought of the version of himself who had once believed experience alone was enough, who had trusted instinct without question. That man had not been reckless. He had been incomplete. Brooks accepted that now without bitterness. A chime sounded softly as the seatbelt sign went off. The cabin exhaled. A woman laughed quietly at something her companion said. Someone opened a book. Someone else closed their eyes. Normalcy returned, not as denial, but as evidence that systems worked best when people respected them. Brooks listened to the sounds with a pilot's ear, cataloging, interpreting, staying alert. He felt no need to prove anything anymore. The aircraft did not care who he thought he was. It responded only to what he did. Mark broke the silence. "Fuel looks good," he said. Brooks nodded. "It usually does when we check it," he replied, not unkindly. Mark smiled, just enough. As the hours passed, the flight continued without incident. That was the victory. No raised voices, no sharp corrections, no moments that would become stories later. When they began their descent, Brooks briefed the approach with the same care he had learned to apply everywhere else. He spoke clearly. He waited for confirmation. He received it. The runway appeared ahead, steady and bright, exactly where it was supposed to be. The landing was smooth, not perfect, professional. The aircraft slowed, turned, and taxied in silence broken only by routine call-outs. When the engines shut down, Brooks sat for a moment longer, hands resting on his knees. He felt tired, but it was the clean fatigue of work done properly. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and opened the cockpit door. Passengers disembarked with nods and quiet thank yous. Some looked him in the eye. Some did not. It no longer mattered. Rachel met him at the galley, her expression open. "Nice flight," she said. Brooks smiled. "You ran a good cabin," he replied. They both knew what those words meant now. Outside, the terminal lights glowed against the darkening sky. Another flight complete. Another set of lives carried safely from one place to another. Brooks watched the last passenger leave and felt a sense of alignment settle in his chest. Not pride, responsibility. The kind that did not ask for recognition. Somewhere beyond the glass, planes lifted and landed in endless sequence, each one a testament to systems built on trust, discipline, and the willingness to correct course when needed. Brooks turned back toward the cockpit, ready to prepare for the next leg, the next set of decisions, the next chance to do it right. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like and subscribe and share your thoughts.